It started out actually very simply as an idea on looking at images of the Earth from space done by NASA in the 60s and 70s, and noticing the amount of historical information about the Earth that becomes apparent when you see it from above. And you see these layers, and it becomes very apparent where you have an area where there's been civilizations for a long time, and you can see traces of the highways and settlements and so on lying just under the surface, which from the ground you cannot see. And then you go up and you get this tremendous revelation of the history of that place through the shadows cast by tracks and byways and so on lying just under the soil. And it led me into a whole way of thinking about the Earth as being this slate which is being constantly drawn upon, not just by man, but of course by time itself. You know, the movement of the continents, the rising and falling of mountains and so on. They all leave their trace under the Earth, and it was such a wonderful idea, this idea of this history of the Earth, this secret history of the Earth, that it's constantly writing, you know, and that's what started it really. And it became for me a kind of a poem, a visual poem about the Earth, really. Then the issue about what it is, this is really very difficult, because for me, painting is essentially a non-verbal communication. This is the whole point of it, you know, that it should bypass, short circuit, cut through the conditions laid down by language, so that you're speaking directly, viscerally to the viewer. You know, that for me is what painting should be. It's a visual thing. So then the difficulty arises when you're dealing with an idea that is quite complex in a way, as this idea of the secret history of the Earth. Just how literal do you want to be? I wouldn't want to just do images which were directly could have been lifted off a satellite photograph or something. That's not really the issue. The issue is this emotional resonance that comes from the idea, which is a visual thing. And so the difficulty for me was, and remains, finding the image that is appropriate. And this is very, very tricky and very subtle, because it's like you want to draw around the perimeter of the thing without being specific, you know. And for me, texture and color became crucial in this search for the right kind of image. When we look at paintings, we're used to seeing paintings through a filter, which involves usually the lighting on the canvas or whatever it is. It involves having to edit out reflective surfaces. You know, when you varnish a canvas, for instance, you get a huge amount of reflective light. All of these sort of things, they actually interfere in the very most basic experience of the colors and the textures that you're looking at. And when I started to do these pieces which were really about just color and texture, it became crucial to me about how much actual reflection you get on the surface, how much shadow is created on the surface, not by implication but actual. So I started to play with this business of having reflective materials like gold, having the exact reverse, a surface which is velvet to the touch, which has no reflective characteristics to speak of at all. All that you're looking at is pure color, which was why I started to experiment with these surfaces where there is just pigment that is dust, literally dust, just holding on by the skin of its teeth through a sort of layer of glue, you know, a small amount of glue on the surface, just gripping to the surface. And then when you look at these images which have this, particularly in relation to textured surface, you get this fantastic division of space. There's one that's slamming itself into your face saying, I'm here, right here, in this position. And the other, right next to it, is sinking back as far as you can imagine, really. And this is what really got me going, this discrepancy of space on the surface of a canvas. And I suppose, really, that has been the major technical issue that I've confronted, really, and it is a language exclusive to these pictures. It's very much a language born out of the idea of these pictures, and remains so, actually. Hate the act of painting. I don't know why, but I never really liked it as a physical thing to do, but I've actually recently begun to really enjoy it, and I think it shows, actually, that the quality of the marks, the quality of the materials is being allowed to speak for itself, rather than me having to do a task to create a particular effect that, you know, is rather difficult to acquire. This actually is becoming a thing in itself, which is really enjoyable. Get to the point where I'm beginning to get an idea of another picture related to this Secret History of the Earth series. It becomes quite important to nail the basic idea in terms of a small pastel like this, where I can manipulate as if it was just an ordinary painting, and I can, you know, brush off and start again very easily and create the basic image of what I want at this level. Now, I know that this is not going to be what it looks like in the end. I certainly hope not, anyway. And I know enough about how the materials work when it comes to doing the real thing to be able to leave it alone at that stage. So I'll do maybe 3 or 4 of these just to make sure that I'm in the right direction, and then I commit myself to this, where it becomes tricky to go back on what you've decided. So that's quite an important part of it. Colour still is for me, I hope will always be actually, the most important part of the expressive spectrum. Colour is absolutely really what it's about, and the texture gives it another dimension. Then the question is, well, how far can you take it? What can you do with it? You know, all the rest of it. And that again is fraught with a few difficulties actually. One of which is the physical, practical difficulty of manipulating these elements, because it becomes very difficult to change something satisfactorily on the level of the physical nature of these materials. It's very tricky because you can't muck it around like oil paint. I mean, it's not, you know, oil paint is wonderful stuff in the sense that you can almost completely obliterate anything you've been working on, or you might wish to show the history of what you've been working on. Oil paint can do all of that. Yes, it's a wonderful material. These materials are not the same. You can't do that quite so easily, and what I've discovered is that the process of building up one of these pictures is quite a long, drawn out one actually, which involves removing stuff that you may not want to remove and starting again, you know, because however good one's imagination is, when it comes to actually creating the painting, the act of putting stuff down will always have its way with how it actually looks, you know. So you're constantly needing to remove this, put stuff down. So it's quite a laborious process and very tricky. So it has to be visualized to a very high degree before you can really satisfactorily produce an image. And I find that very difficult. So I'm actually constantly being pulled to a more traditional way of doing things. And I suppose really I'm in that position now where I'm still trying to see how far it can go before I have to abandon it, you know. But I'm still positive that there are an awful lot of things I can do before I give up this particular way of working.